Hey, it's Mr. Wells here with ELA, Hubston Area Middle School, 8th grade. We have been reading Sing Down the Moon in class by Scott Odell, and today I'm going to read you chapter 16 and 17 of the book. Clouds blew up next morning and it began to rain. We cut brush and limbs from the pinyon pines and made shelters. That night, after the train stopped, we went to the far side of the mesa where our fires could not be seen by the soldiers and cooked supper. Though there was little danger that the soldiers would attack us, my father set guards to watch the trail. We were very careful with our jars of water, but on the sixth day, the jars were empty. That night, my father sent three of us down the trail to fill the jars at the river. We left soon after dark. There was no moon to see by, so we were a long time getting to the river. When we started back up the trail, we covered our tracks as carefully as we could. But the next day, the soldiers found that we had been there. After that, there were always two soldiers at the bottom of the trail, at night and during the day. The water we carried back lasted longer than the first. When the jars were nearly empty, it rained hard for 2 days, and we caught water in our blankets and stored it. We also discovered a deep stone crevice filled with rainwater, enough for the rest of the summer. But the food we had brought with us, though we ate only half as much as we did when we were home in the village, ran low. We ate all of the corn and slaughtered the sheep we had brought. Then we ground up the sheep bones and made a broth which was hard to swallow. We lived on this for 2 days, and when it was gone, we had nothing to eat. Old Bear, who had been sick since we came to the mesa, died on the third day. And that night, the baby of Shining Tree died. The next night was the first night of the full moon. It was then that my father said that we must leave. Dawn was breaking high over the mesa when we reached the bottom of the trail. There was no sign of the soldiers. My father led us northward through the trees, away from our old village and the soldiers' camp. It would have been wiser if we had traveled in the riverbed, but there were many who were so weak that they could not walk against the current. As soon as it grew light, we found patches of wild berries among the trees and ate them while we walked. The berries were ripe and sweet and gave us strength. We walked until the sun was overhead, then, because four of the women could not go farther, we stopped and rested in a cave. We gathered more berries and some roots and stayed there until the moon came up. Then we started off again, following the river northward, traveling by the moon's white glow. When it swung westward and left the canyon in darkness, we lay down among the trees. We had gone no more than 2 leagues in a day and part of a night, but we were hopeful that the soldiers would not follow us. In the morning, we built a fire and roasted a basket of roots. Afterward, the men held council to decide whether to go on or to stay where we were camped. They have burned our homes, my father said. They have cut down the trees of our orchard. They have trampled our gardens into the earth. What else can the soldiers do to us that they have not already done? The Long Knives can drive us out of the canyon, my uncle said, and leave us to walk the wilderness. At last it was decided that we stay. We set about cutting of the brush and poles to make shelters. About mid-morning, while we were still working on the lean-tos, the sound of hooves striking stone came from the direction of the river. Taking up his lance, Tallboy stepped behind a tree. The rest of us stood in silence. Even the children were silent. We were like animals who hear the hunter approach, but from terror cannot flee. The Long Knives came out of the trees in single file. They were joking among themselves and at first did not see us. The leader was a young man with a red cloth knotted around his neck. He was looking back, talking to someone, as he came near the place where Tallboy stood hidden. Tallboy stepped from behind the tree, squarely in his path. Still, the leader did not see him. Raising the lance, Tallboy quickly took aim and drew back, ready to send it toward the leader of the Long Knives. He had practiced with the lance before he came down the mesa, time after time during all of one day, trying to get used to throwing it with his left hand. With his right hand he had been the best of all the warriors. It was with a lance that he had killed the brown bear beyond Rainbow Mountain, a feat of great skill. But now, as the iron-tipped weapon sped from his grasp, it did not fly straight. It wobbled and then curved upward, struck the branch of a tree, and fell broken at the feet of the soldier's horse. The horse suddenly stopped, tossing its head. Only then did the soldier see the broken lance lying in front of him. He looked around, searching for the enemy who had thrown it. He looked at my father, at my uncle, at me. His eyes swept the small open space where we stood, the women, the children, the old people, all of us still too frightened to move or speak. Tallboy, as soon as he had thrown the lance, dodged behind the tree where he had hidden before, back away into the brush, and quietly disappeared. I saw his face as he went past me. He no longer looked like a warrior. He looked like a boy, crushed and beaten, who flees for his life. The rest of the Long Knives rode up and surrounded us. They searched us one by one, making certain that no one carried a weapon. Then they headed us down the canyon. We passed the ruined field of beans and corn and melons, and peach trees stripped of their bark and branches, our burned-out homes. We turned our eyes away from them and set our faces. Our tears were unshed. Soon we were to learn that others bore the same fate, that the whole nation of the Navajos was on the march. With the Long Knives at their backs, the clans were moving. The Bitter Water, under his cover, Red House, Trail to the Garden, Standing House, Red Forehead, poles strung out. All the Navajos were marching into captivity. All right, chapter 17. The sky was gray, and the air smelled of bitter winds. The Long Knives drove us along the river and through the portals of the canyon. Like sheep before the shepherd, we went without a sound. By noon on that day, snow fell out of the gray sky. A sharp wind blew against us. The Long Knives made camp in a wooded draw and told us to do likewise. We stayed there in the draw until the snow stopped, until 2 days had gone. Then on the third morning, we set off again. My father asked one of the Long Knives where they were taking us. The soldier said, Fort Sumner. He pointed southward, and that was all. On that day, we met Navajos from Blue Water Canyon, more than 50 of them. They came down from their village, driven by the Long Knives. Their clothes were ragged, and all were on foot. Most of them were old men and women, but one girl about my age was carrying 2 young children on her back. They were heavy for her, and I asked if I could help her carry one of them. The girl's name was Little Rainbow. She was small but pretty like a flower, and her children, a boy and a girl, looked like flowers too, with their round faces and big dark eyes. She gave me the girl, and I made a sling and carried her on my back the rest of that day. Toward evening, we came upon another band of Navajos. There were about 100 of them, a few on horses. They belonged to the Coyote clan and had been on the trail for a week, prodded along by 5 soldiers. We lighted fires that night and had a gathering. The Long Knives left us alone, but we could see them watching us from the trees while we chanted our songs and prayers. Little Rainbow came, and we sat together in the grass, playing with the children. She took the girl with her, and when she went off to sleep, but in the morning gave her back to me. Sometime in the night, Tallboy slipped into our camp and lay down by the fire. We found him there in the morning, his clothes torn and his feet bare and bleeding. He ate the mush I brought to him, but would not talk. He had the same shamed look about him that I had seen when he had fled from the Long Knives, his lance lying broken upon the ground. The trail led south and eastward across rough country, and we went slowly because of the old people. We had 2 wagons with good horses, but they were not enough to carry all those who needed help. We made scarcely a league during the whole morning. At noon, 2 large bands of Navajo overtook us. They were mostly men, some of them wounded in a fight with the Long Knives. They went by us with their eyes on the ground, silent and weaponless. That afternoon we saw many bands of Navajos. They came from all directions, from the high country and from the valleys. It was like a storm when water trickles from everywhere, and flows into the river, and the river flows full. This was the way the trail looked at night as night fell, like a dark, flowing river. Like Little Rainbow did not come for her child when we camped that night, and I asked my mother what I should do. There's nothing to do, she said. My sister said, you were foolish to take the child. You have enough to carry without her. We will find the girl tomorrow, my mother said, or she will find us. In the meantime, she knows that her child is safe. We did not find her the next day. Tallboy went out looking at sunrise, but soon returned, saying that a soldier had threatened him. The soldier told him to go back to his clan and not to wander around, or someone would shoot him. All day, as we trudged eastward, I looked for Little Rainbow. I asked people I did not know if they had seen her. Everyone shook their heads. In a way, I was glad that I did not find her. I was carrying 3 rolled-up blankets and a jar filled with cornmeal. It was a heavy burden, even without the little girl. But she was good all the time, making happy sounds as the 2 of us went along. As on the day before, Navajos by the hundreds came out of the mountains and forests to join us. The river flowed slower now, and many old people began to falter. At first, the Long Knives rode back and forth, urging them on if they lay down beside the trail. So many fell that afternoon that when the cold wind blew from the north, that the soldiers did not take notice anymore, except to jeer at them. The march went on until dusk. Fires were lighted and people gathered around them. Our clans said little to each other. We were unhappy and afraid, not knowing where we were driven. The soldiers tell me that it is a place of running water and deep grass, my father said, but it lies a long walk to the east. He said this every night as we huddled around the fire. I think he believed it. He wanted us to believe it too. Cast your eyes around, he said. You will see many people sitting beside their fires. They are hungry but not starving. They are cold but they do not freeze. They are unhappy, yet they are alive. We are walking to our deaths, my mother said. The old die now, the young die later, but we all die. Tallboy stared at the fire, saying nothing. He had said little since that day when he tried to throw his iron-tipped lance and had failed. The Navajos, his people, were captives of the Long Knives, and there was nothing he could do to free them. Once he had been haughty, his wide shoulders held straight, his black eyes looking coldly at everyone. I wished, as I sat there beside him, that he would act haughty once more. My sister took the little girl from my lap, where she was sleeping. She is heavy, Lapana said. No wonder, my mother answered. She eats a lot, as much as I do almost, and food is scarce. Every day there will be less until there is none. I took the child and wrapped her in a blanket and lay down with her in my arms. The fire died away and I could see the stars. I wondered what the little girl's name was. She was like a flower in a spring meadow. I gave her that name, Meadow Flower, as she lay beside me. The north wind was cold, and far off among the trees, the horses of the Long Knives were restless. Well, hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to read chapter 18 to you. Make sure that you are working on your remote assignments that have been posted for this week, and make sure you keep up with that. You can email me if you need anything, if you need to set up a Google Meet, if you need questions on the homework. Don't forget, we have book talks scheduled for this week. Remote book talks, 2:30 today, which is Tuesday, the 14th, and then tomorrow at 2 o'clock p.m., Wednesday the 15th, we have the remote final scheduled. So anyway, glad to talk to you. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and enable your notifications so you can see all my wonderful videos. And remember, with Mr. Wells, it's always a great day for ELA.